The most wanted man in the world did not die quietly in his sleep. On February 22, 2026, the mountains of Tapalpa turned into a war zone. Bullets ripped through the trees. Military helicopters swarmed the gray sky. And deep in the chaotic crossfire, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, the ruthless ghost known as El Mencho, was bleeding out. The undisputed king of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel was taking his last breaths. But how did the untouchable phantom finally get caught? Before we dive into this nightmare, hit that like button if you want to see more cases like this. El Mencho was a phantom. For decades, the DEA and the Mexican military chased shadows. They offered $15 million for his head, but he always vanished. He built an empire of blood and absolute terror. His cartel was a private army. They had rocket launchers, they had armored tanks, they had thousands of soldiers ready to die on command. You do not just arrest a man like that, you hunt him. And the hunt required a chilling level of patience. But the authorities missed one tiny detail for years. What was his fatal flaw? It was not money, it was not rival cartels. It was a romantic partner.
Intelligence agencies finally caught a break. They stopped tracking the phantom and started tracking his heart. They followed a romantic partner straight to a heavily guarded cabin hidden deep in the rugged mountains of Jalisco. It was the perfect hideout. Isolated, quiet, completely off the grid. El Mencho thought he was untouchable, but the walls were closing in fast. United States intelligence and Mexican special forces quietly drew an invisible circle around his sanctuary. Does a man with that much power ever truly sleep? On that quiet Sunday morning, the silence broke. The military did not knock. They descended from the sky. 6 helicopters chopped through the mountain air. Elite special forces hit the dirt. But El Mencho was not going to surrender. He was never going to rot in an American prison cell like El Chapo. His personal bodyguards opened fire immediately. It was an absolute bloodbath. High-caliber rounds shredded the forest. The cartel fighters actually managed to force a military helicopter into a dangerous emergency landing. Can you imagine the sheer firepower required to bring down a chopper? El Mencho tried to run. He sprinted into the dense woods as his loyal men dropped dead around him. But you cannot outrun a bullet. He was struck down in the dirt, heavily wounded and gasping for air. The king had fallen, but his death was only the spark that lit the powder keg. Within minutes, the cartel retaliated. They burned cities, they blocked highways, they killed dozens of soldiers. The entire country was on fire. Do you think taking out the top boss actually stops the cartel? Or does it just make the streets even more violent? Let me know your thoughts down below. The authorities dragged his bleeding body into a helicopter to fly him out, but he never made it alive. He died in the sky. But the real question is, who betrayed his exact location to the military in the first place?
Who betrayed the king of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel? For years, El Mencho trusted absolutely no one. He didn't use cell phones, he didn't sleep in the same bed for more than a few days. He lived like a ghost because he knew the moment he got comfortable, he was dead. But even ghosts have weaknesses, and El Mencho had a massive vulnerability that no amount of guns or money could fix. His own body was turning against him. Rumors had been floating around the underworld for a long time. The boss was sick, really sick. He was suffering from severe kidney failure. You can't just walk into a public hospital when there is a $15 million bounty on your head. You have to bring the hospital to you. He built an underground network of private doctors and secret clinics hidden deep in the mountains. But moving heavy medical equipment like dialysis machines is not easy. It leaves a trail. It requires logistics, and logistics require people. Do you think you could keep a secret like that hidden forever? Every time a doctor was blindfolded and driven up into the Sierra Madre, the risk multiplied. The DEA knew this. The Mexican military knew this. They stopped looking for heavily armed convoys and started looking for medical supplies. They were tracking the machines keeping him alive. But the machines alone weren't enough to pinpoint his exact cabin in Tapalpa. They needed a human error. They needed someone on the inside to slip up. And someone
finally did.
The inner circle of the cartel is a snake pit. Everyone is looking for a way to move up. Everyone has a price. Intelligence agencies intercepted a coded message just 48 hours before the raid. A high-ranking cartel lieutenant, someone with direct access to the medical schedule, made a catastrophic mistake. Maybe he was careless, or maybe he sold out the king for the crown. What do you think happens when a top boss gets betrayed by his own family? The message confirmed the exact location. It was a secluded ranch in Tapalpa, a fortress disguised as a quiet retreat. The net was closing fast. American intelligence drones hovered silently miles above the cloud line, completely invisible to the armed guards. They watched the property for 24 hours straight. They saw the heavily armed trucks. They saw the doctors arriving. The target was officially confirmed. Inside the cabin, Mencho was hooked up to a machine, filtering his blood, completely unaware that the sky above him was full of eyes. He was weak. He was vulnerable. The most dangerous man in Mexico was tied to a medical device in the middle of the night. The military knew they had an incredibly narrow window. If he finished his treatment and moved to the next safe house, the trail would go cold again. They had to strike immediately. If you had $15 million staring you in the face, would you risk your life to give up a cartel boss? Let me know in the comments below. The strike team boarded the helicopters in total darkness, but as they flew toward the mountain, they realized the cartel had a terrifying surprise waiting for them in the trees.
The helicopters flew completely dark. No lights, no radio chatter. Just the heavy thumping of rotor blades cutting through the cold Mexican night air. The Mexican Special Forces and DEA advisors thought they had the element of surprise. They were wrong. You do not sneak up on a man who owns a private army. Mencho's ranch was not just a cabin. It was a fortified military base hidden under a thick canopy of pine trees, and his guards were not sleeping. As the first Black Hawk helicopter flared its nose to descend, the forest literally lit up. It was not small arms fire, it was heavy artillery. The cartel had 50 caliber machine guns mounted on armored trucks hiding in the brush. They had rocket-propelled grenades pointing straight at the sky. A terrifying wall of glowing red tracer rounds ripped up into the darkness. Do you know how much firepower it takes to make elite special forces panic? A lot. And the cartel had enough ammo to start a small war. One of the rockets narrowly missed the lead chopper. The pilot had to perform a violent evasive maneuver, banking so hard that the soldiers inside were thrown against the bulkheads. The element of surprise was completely dead. The raid instantly turned into a chaotic bloodbath before a single boot even touched the dirt. The military had to return fire from the air, spraying thousands of rounds down into the trees. But what was happening inside the cabin while the world exploded outside?
Inside the fortified ranch, absolute panic took over. The deafening roar of the machine guns shook the windows. Mencho was still hooked up to his life-saving dialysis machine. His blood was literally pumping through plastic tubes. His top lieutenants rushed into the medical room, screaming over the sound of the helicopter rotors. They had seconds to make a choice. Leave him connected and wait for the military to kick the door down, or rip the tubes out and run. They chose to run. They violently disconnected the supreme boss of the most dangerous cartel in the world. He was bleeding, weak, and barely able to stand on his own 2 feet. His bodyguards practically carried him out the back door into an armored SUV. The plan was to punch through the military blockade and disappear into the rugged mountains on foot if they had to. But the special forces were already roping down from the surviving choppers, landing right in their escape path. Bullets shattered the windows of the cartel trucks. Elite soldiers were advancing through the smoke in the dark, dropping cartel fighters one by one. Mencho's personal security detail was fighting a losing battle, throwing their bodies in front of the boss to keep him breathing. Do you think loyalty in the cartel is real, or are they just terrified of what happens if they let the boss die? Drop a comment below and let me know. The boss was bleeding heavily from his ripped medical tubes, and the soldiers were just 50 yards away. But then, the cartel did something absolutely unthinkable to stall the military.
The soldiers were closing in fast. The armored SUV was trapped. The escape route was cut off by heavily armed Mexican special forces. So the cartel made a terrifying choice. They decided to burn the mountain down. To buy the boss 3 more minutes of life, Mencho's personal guards turned their weapons on their own safe house. They aimed rocket-propelled grenades at the massive fuel tanks feeding the estate's generators. Do you know what happens when thousands of gallons of diesel ignite all at once? The explosion was absolutely catastrophic. A massive fireball ripped through the pine trees, turning the dark night into a scorching hell. The violent shockwave knocked elite soldiers flat on their backs. The blazing inferno created an instant wall of fire between the military and the escaping cartel boss. It was a suicidal tactic. Several of El Mencho's own men were instantly incinerated to protect the Phantom. Would you sacrifice your life in a fire just to give a dying boss a head start? Through the thick black smoke, the armored SUV smashed through the flaming wooden gates. El Mencho was inside, desperately gasping for air. His organs were failing. The violently ripped dialysis tubes were still leaking blood onto the leather seats. He was slipping out of consciousness as the heavy truck bounced violently down the rugged mountain road. But the military was not going to let a wall of fire stop the most important raid of the century.
The military commanders in the sky immediately reacted. The Black Hawk helicopters banked hard, flying straight over the blazing inferno to track the fleeing SUV. The pilots locked their thermal cameras onto the hot engine of the cartel truck. El Mencho could run, but he could not hide from the eyes in the sky. The mountain road was treacherous. It was pitch black, winding along steep cliffs with no guardrails. The driver pushed the armored vehicle to its absolute limits, desperate to reach a secondary extraction point. But how long can a sick, bleeding man survive in the back of a bouncing truck while being hunted from above? His lieutenants were frantically trying to stop the bleeding. They had massive guns and millions of dollars, but none of that could buy them a doctor in a burning forest. The military choppers swooped down low, skimming the tops of the trees. They did not want to blow up the truck. They wanted the king alive. Suddenly, the door gunners opened fire, aiming precisely for the SUV's engine block. Heavy armor-piercing rounds slammed into the hood, tearing the metal to shreds. The engine violently seized, thick white smoke pouring out. The massive vehicle swerved out of control, slamming into a thick line of trees and coming to a dead stop. Do you think the surviving cartel soldiers gave up when the truck crashed, or did they fight to the bitter end? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The heavy doors of the smashed SUV swung open, but the person who stepped out of the smoke was not who the military expected to see.
The heavy steel door of the smashed truck opened. The elite soldiers fast-roped from the hovering helicopters, red laser sights piercing the thick white smoke. They had him. The most wanted man on Earth was finally cornered. But the man stumbling out of the wrecked SUV with his hands up was not the king. He was wearing the boss's jacket, but it was just a decoy. Do you know how desperate a cartel boss has to be to sacrifice a top lieutenant in a fake escape vehicle? While the military chased the burning decoy truck down the mountain, the real El Mencho was slipping away. During that massive fireball explosion at the compound, in the absolute total chaos, his inner circle dragged his bleeding body into a hidden escape tunnel buried beneath the cabin. He was not in the armored car. He was moving underneath the blazing earth. How do you move a dying man through a pitch-black dirt tunnel while his organs are completely shutting down? His guards practically carried him through the dark, narrow passage. He was leaving a literal trail of blood on the floor from the ripped medical tubes. The air inside the tunnel was suffocating. Above them, military helicopters were raining hellfire on the decoy team. Below ground, the Phantom of Jalisco was fighting a silent, losing battle against his own failing body. He had billions of dollars buried across Mexico, but right now, all that money could not buy him a single clean breath.
They finally broke through the exit, emerging miles away from the blazing compound. They were deep in the freezing mountain brush, hidden from the thermal cameras. The final escape plan was to call in a private cartel helicopter for a desperate medical evacuation. A rescue team was flying in under the radar to pull the boss out of the war zone, but El Mencho was fading fast. Without the life-saving dialysis machine, his blood was turning highly toxic. His kidneys were entirely destroyed. He collapsed in the wet grass, coughing violently. His loyal guards formed a tight circle around him, aiming their assault rifles into the dark trees. They were absolutely terrified, not just of the military, but of what would happen to them if the supreme leader died on their watch. Would you risk a firing squad just to stand next to a dead boss in the middle of nowhere?
Suddenly, the heavy roar of a fresh helicopter echoed through the deep valley. It was the cartel's private ghost chopper coming in for the rescue. It hovered violently over the treetops, throwing dirt everywhere. The guards dragged his limp, bleeding body towards the skids, physically throwing him into the back of the dark chopper. They were actually going to make it. They were going to pull off the greatest vanishing act in cartel history. Do you think a billionaire drug lord can outrun death itself when his own body is the executioner? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. The pilot slammed the throttle, pulling the helicopter violently up into the pitch-black sky. But someone inside the dark cabin suddenly pointed a loaded gun directly at the pilot's head.
The barrel of the gun was freezing cold. The pilot froze as the dark chopper lifted off the burning mountain. It wasn't the military pointing the weapon. It was one of El Mencho's most trusted lieutenants. The inner circle was already turning on itself. Why save a dying king when you can just steal the crown? The boss was bleeding out on the metal floor of the helicopter, completely helpless. He built an empire of absolute terror, but in his final moments, he couldn't even defend himself from his own men. Do you think there is any real loyalty in the underworld, or is everyone just waiting to backstab the leader? The lieutenant coldly ordered the pilot to change course. They were not flying to the secret hospital. They were flying out to the middle of nowhere. El Mencho was gasping for his final breaths. His kidneys had completely failed. His body was violently poisoning itself from the inside out. He looked up at the heavily armed men he made rich, and he realized he taught them entirely too well. The Phantom was caught by the monster he created. The lieutenant didn't even need to pull the trigger. Nature was doing the violent work for him. The man who burned entire cities to the ground was choking on his own toxic blood. Have you ever wondered what goes through the mind of a warlord when he realizes his billions cannot buy one more second of life? The helicopter vanished into the dark clouds.
Somewhere in the cold sky over Jalisco, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes took his last agonizing breath. His heart finally gave out. The undisputed king was dead. But the cartel did not announce it. The lieutenant had a chilling plan. They landed the chopper in a remote location and buried the boss in an unmarked grave. A billionaire ghost, rotting in the dirt, completely forgotten. Why keep his brutal death a secret? Because the moment the world knows the king is dead, the vultures circle. The empire would instantly fracture into a massive, bloody civil war. If the boss is secretly dead, who is actually giving the orders today? For months, the cartel pretended El Mencho was still alive. They sent fake messages. They released old audio recordings. They maintained the illusion of the Phantom to keep the rival cartels terrified. The DEA and the military kept hunting a ghost that was already buried deep under the mud. The dark legend of El Mencho easily outlived the man himself. His ruthless syndicate continued to pump poison across the border, driven by the greedy lieutenants who watched him die. The violent machine he built didn't need him anymore. It was completely self-sustaining. The tragic reality is that taking down the top boss never stops the war. It just promotes the next killer. Who do you think is really pulling the strings right now? Let me know your theories in the comments below. But before you go, you have to ask yourself one chilling question. If the military never found the body, is there a chance the Phantom is actually still alive?